Okay, so we are good to go. And there's a couple things that we need to get started when we go with make your own homemade pasta and make your own homemade marinara. So what we're going to do is actually start with the marinara. And the reason for that is the marinara takes about an hour to cook and the pasta takes an hour to rest after you have rolled it out, after you've basically put it all together. So we're going to start with the marinara just to kind of get things going. So what I've got in front of me here is just a kind of your basic sauce pot. This is also the same thing that I use to bake bread in. It is very versatile. It's my Dutch oven. So I'm going to go ahead and get it going on a burner here using just an induction oven. And I'm going to set this to medium heat. Now I'm going to go ahead and add my olive oil. And I'm going to be adding somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3 to 4 tablespoons of olive oil. So it looks something like this. 1, 2, 3, and a pinch more. You want the olive oil to coat the bottom of the pan that you're using and to provide a nice base for the vegetables. Now I'm ready to start thinking about the vegetables that I've got going on here. So in order to make this marinara, I'm going to be using what's called like the trifecta of vegetables, or the holy trinity of vegetables. This is going to be your base of onions, carrots, and celery. Those three make up a great base when it comes to Italian and French cooking. That's why they're called the holy trinity. In this recipe, I'm using onions, carrots, and celery in about the following ratios. Onion, about 2 parts, carrot, 1 part, and celery, a half of a part. So what that broke down to was 2 small onions, 2 stalks of celery, and 2 medium carrots. I added in 2 garlic cloves because you have to have garlic when you're cooking Italian. And this is what I ended up with. Just kind of a bowl of chopped vegetables. If you don't already have these chopped, you can go ahead and start that now. If you do have these chopped, then you're ready to move on to the next step of the process. These vegetables are going to take about 10 minutes to cook. So once my skillet gets decently warm, I'm going to go ahead and add the vegetables to my saucepan. When I do this, I want to make sure that I get everything in there. And the proper time to season your vegetables is when they first go into your sauce. So I'm going to go ahead and add a pinch of salt and a pinch of crushed black pepper. When I use salt in the kitchen, I always like to use either kosher salt or sea salt. So I've got a few things here. This is going to be my kosher salt. I'm not going to add a lot because you can always adjust the seasoning later on. I'm going to add what's about a half teaspoon of salt. Like so. Then I'm going to add about a half teaspoon of crushed black pepper. I keep my crushed black pepper in a container and then I actually crush it or grind it in an old coffee grinder that I have. So I've added some salt, I've added some black pepper. Now I get to stir this all together. What I'm doing here is just incorporating all the vegetables. I'm making sure to break up any pieces that are stuck together and making sure that I've got olive oil evenly coating all of the vegetables. So I'm just breaking them up as I go. And now this is going to cook down for about 10 minutes and I'm going to stir it periodically. I just wanted to get this started so we could get to the fun part of tonight's class. I'm going to turn the heat down to medium. We're not adding any of the tomatoes yet. All I have in here are the carrots, onions, celery, and garlic. I want to cook these down until they're translucent and soft, but not completely fully cooked. So let's move this to the side. And let's get to the part that you came to class for today. And that is for making your own pasta. Now I have to warn you, once you start making your own pasta, there's really no going back. There's no reaching for those packages of pre-made pasta because the taste difference is completely out of sight. Tonight's pasta, I am actually recommending a blend of flours. Now don't worry, if all you have is all-purpose, you're good to go. But If you happen to have any of this on hand, this is the single best flour for making pasta. It's called semolina flour. I get mine from Bob's Red Mill, so you can order it online. I actually buy this by the box, so I always have plenty on hand. However, I still use half all-purpose flour. If you use all semolina, it's a very hearty pasta. Half and half is one of the better blends to do. So the ratio that I'm going to give you, the half to half ratio, is going to break down to just over 2.5 cups of flour. If you want to be exact, it's about 2 3/4 minus about a tablespoon. However, if you happen to have a scale, a kitchen scale, you can weigh this out. And if you weigh it out, you're looking for a total of 400 grams. 200 grams all-purpose, 200 grams semolina. So go ahead and start measuring out that flour. Again, if you don't have a scale, don't worry about it. It's all going to be fine. You're looking for that 2.5 to 2 3/4 cups. If you have a scale, 200 and 200 for 400 grams total. Now, I've already done the measurements here. So in this bowl, I have 200 grams of all-purpose, 200 grams of semolina. I'm going to be dumping this straight onto my counter. But I went ahead and made sure that my counter was clean ahead of time. So if you haven't cleaned your counter in a while, now is a good time to start. I'm going to take my flour, and I'm just going to put it right here in a big pile. Before I do anything else, I'm going to give my vegetables a stir, because I don't want them to burn. Then I'm going to take my flour and I'm going to make what's called a well in the middle of it. I'm going to do this by essentially moving it around in a circle so that all sides have a bit of a barricade to them. What you want is what looks almost like a lake with a mountain all around it. And once you've done that, you are actually ready for the next step. Now, tonight's pasta that I'm teaching you is a 3-ingredient pasta. 2 types of flour and eggs. Often when you look up online pasta recipes, you'll find some that include olive oil and water. I'm not using any of that tonight. However, if you start in on this project and your pasta is just not working, it's too dry or it's not coming together, reach for the olive oil. Just a dab of olive oil, and that will fix most of your problems. If your pasta's feeling too wet and it's feeling too sticky, add a little bit more flour. You can't mess this up. Well, okay, you could mess this up, but you are not going to mess this up. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to crack 4 eggs. Now that seems like a lot, but we're making a pound of pasta tonight. So this is going to make a decent amount of pasta. I'm going to crack them and put them directly into this center lake that we've made. So we're going to have an egg lake right in the center. It looks super cool on your counter, so check it out. I've got 4 eggs here. Now, I didn't tell you this ahead of time, and that's my mistake. It's best if the eggs are room temperature. Now, if yours are coming right out of the fridge, don't freak out, it'll still be fine. But room temperature eggs, easier to work with. I like to set mine out about an hour before. You could also put them in warm water for a few minutes. So what I'm going to do is crack the eggs and put them directly in here. But a quick note about what's called cross-contamination. Once you crack these eggs, your hands will come into contact with raw egg. And once you do that, you want to make sure that you know everything that you touch, because you'll have to sanitize those surfaces. So I'm going to give my vegetables another stir so that I don't have to stir them while I'm dealing with the raw egg. If I do, I'll just switch out the spatula. If your eggs are coming from a reliable source, like a local farm, you have less to worry about. But it's always best to err on the safe side. So I'm going to crack an egg. I'm going to put it right in the center of my pasta. I'm going to repeat that with my next one. Give it a nice crack. Put it in the center of the pasta. Again, the goal here is just to get all 4 eggs into the center of the pasta. And once you have that, you're going to be ready to move on to the next step. Crack my last egg into the pasta. Now, before you throw these eggshells away, save them. You can put these in your garden. You can feed them to your worm bin in the basement if you have one, or throw them in your compost. I like to crush them up and put them right in my compost bin. which I have over here. Next, you're going to be using a fork. So you're going to take a fork, and what you're going to do is begin by breaking up each of the yolks with your fork, and then mixing it together like you were making scrambled eggs. The difference is, as you mix, you're going to slowly and periodically mix in flour from the surrounding mountain of flour that you have. So here I'm just knocking in a little flour. You want to be careful to not break the mountain wall, because if you break the mountain wall, the eggs will spill out onto the counter, and yes, you'll have a mess, but don't worry, it's not the end of the world. So what I'm doing is I'm just slowly working in some of the flour, working it in here and there a little bit, and as I do, you'll see that my pile is actually expanding in size, and that's fine, that's exactly what you want. So I'm mixing this, still going, and soon you're going to just start mixing in almost all of the flour. At this point, once the mixture becomes pretty sticky, and it's got a lot of flour to it, you're no longer in danger of the eggs running all over the place. So now you can just kind of generally mix in, and at first it's going to feel like you messed up, because it looks like just a mess on your counter with a bunch of flour and a bunch of eggs, and you're going to think, I don't know what I'm doing and I have failed. But that's defeatist thinking, and we don't do defeatist thinking in the CHCA teaching kitchen. So what we're going to do is keep mixing it together, and eventually, once it gets firm enough, we're going to begin using our hands to incorporate the flour. Now, the amount of flour that I gave you is what we call the ideal amount of flour. If we can, we're going to mix all that flour in, but don't panic if you don't end up mixing it all in. So, you'll notice I've taken a little bit of the loose flour and rubbed it in my hands so my hands aren't sticky. Now I'm just going to press down and fold gently this mound of dough that I have. I'm pressing and folding, and as I do, what I'm also doing is folding in the flour from the edges. So with my hands, I'm scooping up that flour and I'm pressing down, scooping up and pressing down as I go. Again, the goal is to work all of this flour into the dough. But in order to do that, you have to form the dough first. So now I've got a little bit of a dough formed. I've also got dough all over my hands. Don't worry about that. Continue to take the flour, and as you do, rub the counter a little bit to get up any spots that are stuck on there. And now you're going to do a process called kneading the flour, kneading the dough. That's kneading with a K. Kneading, contrary to popular opinion, is not punching down. It's actually taking the heel of your hand and rolling the dough out. So I'm going to take the dough and push down with the heel of my hand, forcing the dough onto the counter. As I do, my goal is to work in as much of this extra flour as possible. Now, while I'm standing here, I'm also noticing that my vegetables, they're cooking pretty quickly. So I am going to go ahead and take this hand with the raw egg and give them a stir. And that's because I do not want them to burn. That would be the worst case scenario here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the heat down to medium-low on my vegetables. Again, not wanting them to burn. So here I go, working in the flour, working in the dough, and you'll notice at this point that I only have maybe about 1/4 of a cup, a couple teaspoons of flour left with some chunks. I'm going to go ahead, place the dough right on top of that, and just press down. And what I'm trying to do, again, is incorporate as much as possible. Now, once you feel like you can work with your dough, once you feel like your dough's coming together, now it's time to really begin putting some muscle into it. Okay, there are those who will tell you that you can use a KitchenAid stand mixer or even a food processor to do this part. What I would tell you is those people, they don't like working with their hands. There's nothing like getting your hands into your food. This is what you're eating for dinner tonight. You might as well take the time to really enjoy it. However, it is also hard work. So this is where you're going to get a workout. Notice what I'm doing is pushing the flour down, pushing the dough ball down into the counter while moving it a little bit to the side. I'm going to slowly work in a little bit more of the flour while I give the vegetables a stir. Remember, don't burn your vegetables. Then, I'm just going to keep working this. The total amount of time, once the dough comes together in this state, you're looking for about 3 to 4 minutes of working this dough together. And again, don't get that defeatist attitude. And also, don't panic if not all of your flour gets worked in. I mean, look here. I've got about a tablespoon or two that didn't make it. And that's okay. I can live with that because this is starting to come together nicely. Now, it's still grainy. It doesn't have a smooth texture, which means I still have to keep working this flour. So I'm going to take it, I'm going to work it, and I'm going to work it. And this is where you start to realize your own limitations as a chef with regard to how quickly your arms get worn out. But it's good because afterwards, you'll feel like you truly slaved away at dinner for your family, and they better thank you for this amazing pasta. Or, parents, if you're watching, put your kids to work. When they say, "What are you making for dinner?" say, "No, it's you who are making dinner. Get over here and knead this pasta for me." So what you're looking for, and it's actually starting to get there, I can already feel it. You're looking for what's called kind of like a smooth, almost even I would say shiny texture to the pasta. You want it to come together in such a way it's not going to feel springy like bread dough, but you're going to begin to feel that it's softening up a little bit, it's becoming smoother on the surface, and all the flour has been incorporated. And I'm actually just now coming to that stage. So, what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to take my pasta and I'm going to press it down into a little bit of an oval shape, like this. Kind of a smoothie texture on the outside. It's come together nicely. Now this needs to rest. If I try to roll this out immediately, I won't have very good results. Stirring my vegetables. So what I'm going to do is actually wrap this in plastic. Now if you have plastic wrap, use that. If you don't, I actually like to use freezer bags. So I would take a freezer bag, put this inside of it, pull out the air, and let it rest for 1 hour. Now you're thinking, I'm not that patient. You have to be patient when you're in the kitchen. If this doesn't rest for an hour, it's not going to come together the way you want it to for the pasta consistency. So wrap this in plastic, give it an hour. Now, while that's going, I'm going to go ahead and show you the next step with our marinara. We have this marinara going over here. The pasta's resting. I need to get this marinara rolling with the sauce. So, today's sauce is going to be using crushed tomatoes. Why? Because they're probably in your pantry right now, and it's a really easy thing to add. If you're adding real tomatoes, that's awesome. They're not quite in season locally yet, but the crushed tomatoes will work just fine. I'm actually going to be adding 2 32-ounce cans of crushed tomatoes. Now, if you only have 1 can, go for it. If you've got 4 cans and you doubled the vegetables, go for it. All of those things are going to be fine. I do want to pause here for just a second. After we finish the actual cooking part of this, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about an initiative we're starting where you can actually make a double batch of these meals in order to give a meal to those in need. It might be a neighbor, it might be someone that you just want to bless with a meal for that night. Maybe there's someone who lives down the street and they've got 3 kids and their life's chaotic right now and you just want to give them a meal. I'm going to talk a little bit after this about how we can do that with some of these recipes. This is a really easy recipe to double or even triple. If you've got a big pot and you want to make a big batch of marinara, it freezes really well. What you do is you add the crushed tomatoes. And when I do this, I always like to scoop out the can. So again, I'm adding 2 cans. If you were to have on hand a couple bay leaves and you like adding bay leaves to your whatever you're cooking, this would be a good time to do that. I'm not going to be demonstrating that, but you could always do that. What you want is to actually bring this sauce to a simmer. So I'm going to turn my heat back up to medium, and I'm going to stir this together. Once this begins to simmer, I'm going to reduce the heat to medium-low, and I'm going to let it simmer for, you guessed it, an hour. Don't rush this process because you want these flavors to combine. So let me kick up the heat a little bit, and we will bring this to a simmer. Now, we already talked a little bit about patience, and we talked a little bit about this whole process. I did a little bit of a cheating step in that I went ahead and made a round of pasta so I could demonstrate to you what this actually looks like. To do that, I want to show you the difference in color and texture between the one I just made and the one that went ahead and rested for an hour. This is shinier, smoother, and all together feels much more like something I'm ready to roll out with a rolling pin. So I'm going to go ahead and put the one I rolled out just now in here and let it rest. Just as a heads up, my sauce is already simmering. Just as a heads up, this pasta can just sit on your counter for 2 or 3 hours before you get to it. If it's going to be longer than that, or if you end up with extra pasta, just store it in the fridge, roll it out tomorrow. The method I'm going to be demonstrating to you today uses what's called a pasta machine. That's this cool little device that I have here. This is the handheld pasta machines. They do have a pasta machine that you can attach to a KitchenAid mixer. This one I especially like because it has the base for rolling out the dough, and then it has the pasta cutter attachment. So I'm going to put the attachment on, like so. Then it has this vise for attaching to your countertop. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on my counter, right here on the edge. And you do want to make sure that it is secured and tight. So tighten it all the way, but don't crack your countertop. And then there will usually be a handle. So find the hole for the handle. There will be 2 holes, one on the rolling device and one on the cutter. But we are using the rolling device right now. Your rolling device will have numbers on it. Make sure that it is set to number 1 or 0, depending on your particular pasta maker. Okay, so now I'm going to take my dough, and the only other thing that I have here, let me go ahead and grab a little butter knife. The only other thing that I have that I'm going to be using and demonstrating for you is a little bowl of flour. This is just to keep anything from sticking and keep the process nice and clean. So I'm going to sprinkle some flour on my countertop. There's no science to this. I'm not weighing the dough or anything. I'm just cutting off a portion of dough. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting down, and I've got a piece of dough, and it's ready to go. I'm going to take this piece of dough, and on my counter, I'm going to just pat it down until it's mostly flat and ready to go through the machine. Now, if you do not have a pasta machine, do not panic. A rolling pin is more than sufficient. With a rolling pin, you can get this very thin, and once it's thin, just use a pizza wheel or a pizza cutter to cut ribbons out of it. With this marinara that we're making tonight, I'm actually recommending more of a fettuccine size of pasta rather than the spaghetti size, but really any size would work. The most important thing is to start on the lowest setting of the roller. The lowest setting will be the widest between the 2 rollers, and as you roll the pasta, you get more and more narrow. So I'm going to take setting 1, and I'm going to take my pasta, and I'm going to begin the wheel. As I do that, I'm going to go ahead and place my pasta at the top. I can already see that my machine is moving around a little bit, and I need to tighten it. So I'm going to tighten my machine. And what I'm doing is spinning the wheel to send the pasta through at level 1. And there it is, 1 pass through. But you're not done at 1 pass. Keeping it on level 1, you're going to send it through for 2 additional passes. This is just to ensure that it is as thin as you need it to begin the process. So again, pass number 2. Now we're going to go for pass number 3. So I'm going down. And my pasta is now ready to begin the thinning process. For the thinning process, I'm going to incrementally decrease the size between the rollers. I'm going from number 1 to number 2. And with each of these, I'm going to go through one time. So on number 2, I do a single pass, like so. I switch it to number 3. For number 3, I do a single pass, like so. You can do this with one person. If you have a kitchen assistant, it makes it even easier. I'm now switching to spot number 4. For spot 4, like all the others, I'm going through just one time. Now you'll notice this particular length of pasta I have is not the widest. You can fix that at the beginning. If you want a nice wide selection of pasta, then merely make that initial press down into a wider circle. I'm now on level 5, and I'm going to roll it through all the way, catching the bottom and using my hand to sort of blanket the pasta. You'll see it's getting lengthier with each pass. I'm now ready for level 6. My pasta maker goes up to level 9, so I only have a few passes left. And thinner, thinner. I do recommend taking it to its absolute thinnest setting because I do believe you're going to get a better pasta that way. Now this is the same pasta recipe that I would use if I was making lasagna, if I was making ravioli. You would do the same exact process. The difference is with ravioli or lasagna, you won't send it through the cutters at the very end. You'll use it like it is. And by the way, a little tip for lasagna. You won't actually cook the noodles before using them if you've made fresh noodles for lasagna. You'll be able to use them just as they are once they come out of this rolling machine. Okay, you'll notice the pasta is getting a little harder to deal with because it's becoming longer and longer. I am about ready to start my final setting, giving my marinara a stir. And I'm now ready for setting 9. This is where the fun really gets started. So making sure that I'm nice and centered here. Go ahead in, and then if you can, catch the bottom of it and bring it out so it doesn't stick. If you find the pasta is sticking, you can use flour. Here is the length of pasta that I now have. So when you're all said and done, you should have a nice kind of lengthy piece of pasta that should be a couple feet long, and this is what you want to use going into the next step. For my next step, I'm actually going to switch from what was the rolling device onto the cutting device. So take the handle off, move the handle over to the cutting side, depending on what you want to use. Again, I'm going with fettuccine, so that's the one I'll be using. I'm also going to put a tiny bit of flour on here, because I find that when it goes through the cutting device, sometimes these pieces like to stick together. So a little bit of flour at this stage is going to help, because you're not actually going to incorporate the flour into the dough. It's just going to help the dough from sticking. Okay, because I'm doing this with one person, I'm going to stretch the dough out this way, hold it up to feed it into the machine, and then I'm going to begin the cutting process. Now, as I do this, I'm going to take my other hand and reach it under the pasta to catch what's coming out. I want to make sure it's going in straight, so you can always pause to adjust it. And as it comes through, again, pausing to adjust, as it comes through, you're going to get these lovely long strands of pasta all the way through, and now you have all this awesome, amazing, delicious looking pasta. You'll notice, however, that it's very lengthy. This is where that pizza cutter comes in handy. I'm going to go ahead and grab mine here. And with this pizza cutter, what you can do is cut the pasta into your desired length. So I'm going to lay it on the counter, and I'm going to cut and cut so that you end up with pieces of pasta that are about this long, about a foot long or so. And then what I like to do is go through and separate any that have stuck together. This is where you can add a little bit of that flour to actually keep the pasta from sticking together. You don't want it to all clump up on your counter because you have a lot more pasta to roll out. That was only about a fifth of my pasta. So I still have 4 more rolls to go or so in order to get that full pound of pasta. Now, at this point, when you're about a fifth of the way done, it would be wise to go ahead and start your water boiling. So I've got over here a pot of water that I filled up about 2/3 of the way, and I would go ahead and turn that to boil at this point. When the water is boiling, that's when you would add a pinch of salt. It's best to cook your pasta, especially on marinara night, in water that's been lightly salted. I'm going to take a bit of flour, sprinkle it on this pasta, and toss it together so that the pieces don't actually stick. And now, what you're left with is this amazing looking fettuccine pasta that you have. Homemade, you made it all yourself. And so when your family comes downstairs and they say, "What's for dinner?" you can say, "Made from scratch pasta with homemade marinara." Now, I'm going to go ahead, kind of as we conclude here, and demonstrate one more time this process, just so you kind of have the whole process and system down. You cut off your piece, you push it down on the counter. And this time I'm going to make it a little bit wider. And then you get your rolling system set up. So I'm going to put my roller on one. I'm going to go ahead and send it through. So I've demonstrated for you how to actually roll out the pasta, how to make the marinara, which should be simmering nicely right now. And remember, give it that full hour. I want to take just a moment and talk with you about plating the pasta. It is true that you eat with your eyes even before you eat with your mouth. And when you plate the pasta, I am going to recommend that you, after you sort of cook the pasta, which by the way, this pasta cooks very quickly. Plan on 3 to 4 minutes. It cooks almost in no time at all. After you drain that pasta, mix some marinara with it. You could also scoop the marinara on top. Don't forget your garnishes. There's 2 garnishes I would recommend for tonight's dinner. The first is my personal favorite, Parmigiano Reggiano. I like to use a grater and grate this cheese over the pasta. I also will occasionally use a vegetable peel to peel off strips of the cheese if I want a fancy sort of look. Because then what I'll do is I'll take some of these little strips that I've peeled and place them on top of the pasta to make it look really spectacular. In addition, a final step that I want to share with you is the addition of basil. Now, basil is not easy to find this time of year, but there are some indoor growers like 80 Acres Farms that are growing it right now. So I've got some here from 80 Acres. And what I'm going to show you is called the chiffonade cut. So I'm going to take the basil leaf, it gets its name from cigar, the cigar cut, and I'm going to roll the basil leaf like you were rolling a cigar or a tobacco leaf. I'm going to roll it up tightly, like so, and then I'm going to take a sharp knife, and on my cutting board, I'm going to cut it into small pieces, very carefully, rolled up. And once you've done that, you get these cool little cuts of basil that you can then use as a garnish and sprinkle on top of your pasta. So you have a nice little bit of Parmigiano Reggiano cheese, a nice little bit of basil to put on top. You might even dab it with a tiny bit of really nice olive oil, and you are basically good to go. So with that said, your sauce is simmering, your pasta is waiting for you to roll it out, and you are probably waiting to eat a most delicious meal.